Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Trisha, and today we have the pleasure of speaking with Peter and Anne Selby. Welcome, Peter and Anne. How are you today?
Oh, we're great.
Fabulous.
So nice to see you.
It's nice to see you as well.
Great time.
So for some of our viewers, they are unfamiliar with the work you do. So I would love it if you could explain, what do you guys do? And how did you come about to this place where you're at right now?
So I'm a physical therapist, and I started in physical therapy practice about just a little over 40 years ago. And so I went right into orthopedics as a PT. So I enjoyed doing physical manipulation of the body, and that was a great love. And I studied a lot and got credentials in osteopathic manual therapy, manipulative therapy. Then I got into a really very important transformation through the more subtle aspects of my osteopathic studies, which first, as an orthopedic guy, I was doing a lot of, you could say, manuals, guided mobilization of joints, and just really approaching the body biomechanically. And that was a great thing, but I was kind of frustrated that it seemed like I was pushing into the body rather than, in other words, I had to apply force to the body to get a release. And I wasn't that happy with the long-term results in some of my clients. And I was always scratching my head saying, why is the body seemingly resistant to just being mobilized and holding that? And when I got into craniosacral work, actually, the first thing I experienced was I had a shoulder problem, and a guy came out from Ohio who had a craniosacral practice, and he was specifically really good at unwinding the body. His name was Barrett Dorco, I believe, and he introduced a class of physical therapists, myself being part of that class, to this concept. And a lady did an unwinding of my arm where she moved my arm according to the subtle indications in my own tissue rather than mobilizing my shoulder joint. And she actually was focusing down in the middle of my back. And by the time she did 10 or 15 minutes of this unwinding, my shoulder being left, and it was gone permanently. And I was like, I think I want to learn more about this. That worked. That actually worked. And that was a kind of doorway into pursuing the subtleties that were latent in the body tissue. And you could say I learned more and more how to listen to the body rather than direct force into the body around very specific and scientifically defined axes of motion that was really the basis of my practice before that experience. So I basically gradually transformed from one kind of practice to another, and it became more and more apparent there was energetic influences that were in the body that had to be accounted for. I became progressively sensitive to that. I loved working with that subtlety, and I got passionate about engaging with the body through the subtlest listening techniques. And I found it really worked really well. And then I had an indication that the body's energy system was actually flowing through specific channels. And before it wasn't very long until I actually discerned some of those channels and how to induce the energy in the channels, and then became a acupuncturist to really learn about the meridians and the channels that the energy was flowing in, and practiced that for a while. And one day, making a long story short, I graduated in 78, so it would be about 16 years after I went into practice, about 1994, that I became spontaneously clairvoyant. And that took the whole energetic frame into a whole nother dimension, you could say. So long answer, but I think an important one that took me from approaching the body biomechanically, understanding the nature of the myofascia and the joints and everything biomechanically, to understanding the body through its energetic nature. and then seeing consciousness actually manifesting an interaction between the body and the mind. And I saw some very startling healings based purely on releasing energies that were in the aura that were basically inducing the body to experience an energy blockage. So the auric influences were creating a blockage in the body. And when the auric influences were released, I was like dazzled by the result. And I was like, so this is really an off-body phenomena. It's consciousness. And when you would like, I'll share the story of those initial experiences clairvoyantly and how I became clairvoyant more specifically. But this work is actually using clairvoyance, the faculty of appreciating the subtle in the aura and its influence on the body, to account for why the body is dysfunctional or diseased, and interacting. This is the kicker. The way that my clairvoyance began, day one, was engaging with angels, specifically Archangel Michael. And the two very fabulous healings I saw the first day of being clairvoyant changed my life. And I declared that day that I would be working with angels for the rest of my life. And I have been, because what I saw then, seeing, and I was like, wow, there is this spiritual force around us that has influences over our energy field, and that have influences, and that you can induce and interact with. So the angels can be, you can invoke them, you can interact with them, they can communicate, and they can clear energy blockages and remove negative influences. And I was like, well, sign me up, because I know about the energy in the body. I know how when energy is blocked, the body gets blocked. Now I know the aura contains, influences that can correlate to energy blockages in the body. And now I know that there are spiritual forces out there, dark, which can increase the problem, and light, which can relieve the problem. And by choosing to work with the forces of light through invocation and specific requests that are literally invited from the client, the angels can clear the blockages in the aura with instantaneous body effects. And I'm like, I can't go back to normal physical therapy.
Or normal life.
Like my life changed, and my whole way of thinking changed. And the angelic presence around us, we began to engage with. And the next thing you know, we're experiencing a lot of deep benefits in our relationship and in our own physical challenges. And we just really fell increasingly in love with angels as a source of healing and inspiration. And it goes on with more and more deep experiences and stories and amazing healings. And oh my goodness, it's just the most wonderful transformation that I experienced in my work, and then progressively in my personal life, because I didn't start out thinking about angels, and I was just an ordinary Joe doing a job. And then I became passionate about working with angels to do a spiritual work, and that changed my life personally as well. So I hope that's the beginning of it. I want Anne to share how we got, yeah.
What would you like for me to share?
Oh, well, I was just saying that's kind of my side of the story, but there's a wonderful story in itself in how you joined with me in the angelic work that I was doing for a number of years before I met you. And Anne plugged herself into this work, and I think created the conditions for the angels to take it a lot deeper. And so I'm indebted to Anne, as well as the angels, for guiding us into deeper understandings of the spiritual influences on our energy system, and sharing this work of connecting people with their guidance. And Anne is a marvelous therapist, and I'd love you to tell your story. That was kind of my side of it.
My entry into energetic work was at age 13, reading The Sleeping Prophet about Edgar Cayce. And he had a secretary who took down all of the words that he used when he was asleep and bringing healing information to the people that were seeking his help.
He would like channel in his sleep direct
Incredible.
information.
For health purposes.
Yeah, for health purposes that people could then read in a transcription, and it created a lot of healing and benefit, I guess.
And his established work is still readily available to everybody today through the ARE. I've forgotten exactly what that stands for, but anyway, his works are still available. And so that opened me up at a tender age, and then I went on into the corporate world, and then into the artistic world, and then into the yoga world, and was doing energy healing work myself with various studies that I had taken, and was really interested in doing something more with what I was capable of, and was looking for someone to study with. Nobody was showing up until I attended a lecture that Bruce Lipton of Biology of Belief fame, that's Bruce's work, his first work, was giving a lecture, and Peter Selby was also asked to come on stage as part of that evening. And when he demonstrated his work, I said, oh yes, indeed, I wanted to have a session with him, and I wanted to take his workshop. I would love to learn more about what he was able to do. And so I got the first session the very next day with Peter, and it totally changed my life, and certainly opened me even further to the beauty of spiritual work and the wonder of what can take place when someone is conscious of what it is that has brought about what they're experiencing. What is the backdrop? What are the behind the scenes looks that can be shown, so that people can not just say, ask for healing, but know what they're asking that is going to help them heal. Mm-hmm. And so that work has evolved. And when I started working with Peter, actually before we got married, we were working together, and I noticed that a lot of what Peter was saying was pretty much going over people's heads.
Trying to describe what's in a person's aura, like kind of pointing to their right or to their left, above their head or whatever, and whatever part of their auric bubble I was alluding to. It was kind of like clear to me what I was pointing at and describing, but it really wasn't so clear to them. I think they got the basic idea.
So I started taking notes and actually making a drawing of what he was being guided to see, so that we would all be on the same page. And it worked out really, really well. And apparently the angelic realm thought so too. And so they brought through some visions of sort of a map of the auric field using planetary archetypes, so that you could get a handle on consciousness. And when that came in back in 2002, we made a graphic of it, which we use practically in every session that we do. And they also brought through other visions to help us understand what it is that they wanted to bring onto the earth plane, for us to help other people understand what was involved in healing and how healing could take place in such a short period of time. So we got together, and we've been together now for 18 years.
And maybe a little later we can show an example or two of the pictures that Anne makes representing influences.
I would love that. So our audience can
It's quite
see,
fascinating.
like, in detail, kind of how it lays out in a visual form. That'd be wonderful.
Right, because it turns out the way the angels relate is they want to take a person into a part of their mind, you could say, where they're having problems, and they want the person to recognize how that part of their feeling or thinking or believing or what they're actually doing is creating an opportunity for more awareness, may not be working out so well, may give them sort of some life, may be giving feedback through physical disease or physical dysfunction or relationship problems, or just problems in the real world, earning a living or creating what the person would like to create for themselves that might be in a very deep pattern not happening. And so when somebody comes to us and they're liking to find out more about why these problems exist, it's fun to invoke the angels, and immediately they start using these different tools of communication, putting the light on certain areas of consciousness where there's a problem. And it's so fun for us to be inspired to actually receive the message. We're kind of like, I like to explain that we don't do healing when we're working with angels. We communicate from the angels to the person through the different knowledge bases that we have, what the angels are saying, and we give our best explanation of the phenomena, and then we help the person engage with the angels to create changes. And so
I call it the healing protocol.
Right. So the whole thing starts with invocation, and then it moves into a reception of angelic guidance, and then interacting with the client to relate to the information and coming to an understanding of what wants to heal and change in terms of what the mind is creating and where the blockages are. They could be completely physical in origin, whatever the issue, but the angels will point out what the source or different sources of the problem are. And then the person can literally turn to the angels in the spirit of, hey, if this information is true, it would help me, and this information and healing is coming from divine source, I invite it. And the angels just need to hear that. I invite this healing on those terms, true and good for me and coming from God. And they manifest instantaneous healings, which result in instantaneous physical changes.
And that's what's so cool when we see people in person, because we work with people all over the world through mediums such as this, Zoom or Skype or the telephone. But when we're in person, because Peter's a licensed physical therapist, he can show people how their range of motion changes and shifts from how it was before the healing to how the body has shifted and changed after the healing. And that can be, for most people, the aha or the wow or the oh my God kind of experience, because something really shifts and changes and you can see it physically.
That's incredible. So I want to know if you guys came from a particular faith that led you to work with angels, or can anyone kind of try this kind of healing and see if it's something for them?
Well, after attending at least 10 or 15 ashrams and having 20, no, I'm only kidding. I really did not have too much of a spiritual background. What I did have was, when I was 22, I went to a biblical studies college just after I graduated from Stanford, because I was going to be, I am a pilot, and I was going to fly for an organization that required me to get some training in the Christian religion. And so I did. And after several years, I decided that was all very interesting, but given my situation at that time, I really didn't think that I wanted to disappear into the jungles of Indonesia or whatever and fly airplanes in that context. And my interest changed, and I went back to school and did a second degree in physical therapy because I just didn't want to do that. But that was my exposure to religion. And I would say by the time that I started to relate to angels as a physical therapist, that was well behind me. And I'm sure that the basic understanding of God and angels, it may be influenced, but I don't consider myself a religious person. So, we all grew up in a culture, and I didn't grow up in a religious family, but I did have that exposure. And exactly how much that influenced me to call on an angel, I don't know. But perhaps during this interview, I will explain why I connected with angels the day I became clairvoyant. I think that's an interesting story. I'm not even sure I answered your question.
Well, I would say in answer to your question that people of all faiths, people of no faith, people are welcome to this practice, because we don't hold anything to not be correct in the eyes of God. However people view, it's them calling on their connection to their source, whatever that terminology might be. So I have a Christian background. There are many faiths that I've looked at, and there are so many that all seem to go in the same direction. And so we say, come one, come all. If you're drawn to this work, we're happy for that. If you're not drawn to this work, we completely understand. We just do the same work with everybody, regardless of their belief or their walk in life.
Okay, thank you so much for explaining that. I just feel like sometimes when you have the word angel put in front of clairvoyant healing, that sometimes people have a presumption about you have to be of a particular faith to participate or for anything to even happen. So I appreciate the clarification on that.
It's so cool that it doesn't rely on a belief system.
Mm-hmm.
It's calling upon, and we say angel because of Peter's experience that first day as he was relating to. And yet it doesn't seem to matter whether we call on angels or guides or guardians or universe, or
say I'd like to call on source, or I'd like to call on the universe. Somebody the other day said, I'd like to, in answer, how do you conceive of, or how would you like to call on God or the divine, or how would you like to start this session in terms of who you relate to? And he said, and I'd never heard this before, I'd like to call on intent. And I said, okay, so you're naming the divine intent. And he said, yes. He says, I've read a lot of Carlos Castaneda. And he said, that's a phrase that he uses. And ever since I came across that, I have been calling the divine intent. And I said, well, yeah, it's truly, that works for me. I kind of understand that because I believe intention is everything, including the universe reflects at its very core intent, or it would not be. And so I said, yeah, that I can work with that. Now, if somebody said, I'd like to call on the devil, I would say, I can't do that for you. You'll have to go elsewhere, because I don't work with the dark force. I know there is a dark force in the universe. And it's pretty obvious if you look at human affairs that there's a lot of dark force activities, and we don't work with the dark force. So if anybody came to us and said that was their request, we would ask them to go somewhere else, just because we can't support that in our own belief system of what is right. And so when we say we're open, we are open to anything which connects legitimately to the original divine creative force and presence. And I would say the whole key in this work is to align not through terminology, but through doing the right thing. You could say the universe supports the right thing. And so when we're off base, when we're living a lie, when we're living out of integrity with the basic principles, which, you know, really are quite well reflected in the golden rule even. And there are many, many deep principles of life that pretty much everybody would experience as, that's how I would like to be treated. That feels like a respectful approach to the best that I know is true and is a good thing. So when you boil it right down, you're working with angels who support the good things of life. And usually we get in trouble when our minds go dark and negative and we can't forgive, or we hold negative energies towards ourselves or other people. When we have guilt, when we have regret, shame, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All these negative things are actually states of mind that block energy. And it's wonderful to see that angels can help you to explore that kind of negativity that's blocking a person's energy and clear it. And when they clear it, the mind can pop into a whole new frequency and go positive.
And in
So
that kind of case, does the person need to be aware that they have those blockages, that maybe they have a more negative or low vibrational mindset? Do they have to be actually conscious of it?
I don't think it's something that they need to know. Most people come because they have something that they want to work on, they want to shift and change, or they want to understand. They simply want to be healed. And the way that the allopathic modalities go is do something to the body, give it something, take something away, support it, massage it. You know, and what we're doing is we're asking to be told a story. What is the story that can be told about this cancer? What's the story that can be told about this dysfunction? What's the story that can be told about this lack of financial stability or the relationships that don't work out? What's behind all of this? I'd like to understand why I'm where I am, and I want to heal. And so that's what I say the angels are doing. They're telling a story. My story was when I first saw Peter, he made the invocation, he stepped back, he was guided clairvoyantly to look at my energy field, and the first thing he said was, something happened when you were 13 and you're beside yourself, meaning I had dissociated some energy off to my left. And to him, clairvoyantly, it looked like a shimmering image of another me, another body, sort of, that was younger. And he asked, how old? Associated effect. And the angel said 13, but something happened when you were 13. And I said, well, yes, something happened when I was 13, but that's not why I'm here today. I'm here to look at these other things. And he said, well, your angels are saying it's very important to put this part of you back in. And that truly was what was life-changing for me, and really opened my eyes to, wow, I had a trauma when I was 13, and now I'm 50 years old at that time, and that has been hanging out there all this time, and I didn't know it. I knew I freaked out. I didn't know I didn't compose. I dealt with that. I was over that. Well, I wasn't. And when that energy came back in, it not only changed my body, but because of that changed my life. So it's very, very important to know that we are here and we are supported, and our stories can be told to us. We oftentimes think we know it all, and we don't.
So I like to pick up on your question. You need to know. And I would say, in the case of a disease, most people don't consciously know why they created the disease. So the answer to your question would be no, you don't need to know. Mm-hmm. The angels will take you to certain arenas in your life, certain epics, certain experiences that you've had where you suffered some kind of traumatic problem. It could be emotional trauma, mental trauma, spiritual trauma, physical trauma, and it could be, the trauma of just getting disconnected from source, from God, through your own state of mind, going into a different arena. So the angels can unveil, we like to say. It's like they pull the curtain back on material that may be psychologically hidden, shut off, to protect oneself, put to the side, dissociated from. But we like to say, when a person dissociates, it's as though they just lost some part, like energy, vital force, being expressed in that dissociated part. It's no longer nourishing the body. And when consciousness splits, it always diminishes the overall life force. And so angels help you to understand what that split is. And probably the most common expression in this work of healing is putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. The Humpty Dumpty story of the Great Fall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty back together again. And I like to think of, but angels can, because I would say
the asterisk in the story.
Of all the things that angels do, they certainly put a person back into coherent consciousness in certain regards that are relevant to one's healing. per request by the person. Like, our job is to explain what the angels are showing. Like with Anne, I said, okay, so something happened to you that was very traumatic at 13, and you still have a split in your energy that is still reflecting that trauma. And that split needs to be resolved, and that part of you that is holding itself off to the side in a considerable, you could say, negative state of mind, like in shock.
Shock, yeah.
Yeah, and when it came back in, her physical body instantly changed, and she could start doing positions. She was a yoga instructor at the time and a yoga therapist, and she found herself being able to do extreme postures that she was having trouble with before, that she could barely get into, and all of a sudden she could get into them again.
So flexible. It was amazing.
And that is one of the key effects of this work, actually. The work is, when you improve energy flow in the body, you improve mobility, and you improve a lot of other physical phenomena as well. So the Chinese say energy is the director, or the master of circulation. So qi commands blood. And when you think of deficient qi, which could mean that the latent energy in the tissue is deficient, or the flow in the tissue is deficient. But whatever, there's less energy when and less circulation, is my point, when the flow or the actual quantum finished. So if you put more energy into the system by restoring that part of it, the energy system to itself, the split out part comes back and becomes coherent again with the overall energy system, there's more vitality and there's more circulation, and circulation heals things for sure. Circulation in every sense.
The body is the ultimate healer of the body, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Certainly.
It's the healer.
So anyway, what I learned is that this energy flow actually influences the physical grid, you could say, or the connective tissue that connects everything to everything, envelops the organs, and penetrates and gives structure to the organs, like the substructure in a skyscraper. It's the same in the body. The liver has a subgrid that gives it its form, and it's wrapped up in this stuff called fascia. And fascia is connective tissue, and muscles are enveloped in and wrapped up in and connected via connective tissue. And so tendons are collagen-based connective tissue. They connect the muscle to the bone and operate the body when pulled on. And so that's the great thing, that energy flows through those connective tissue structures, and the connective tissue shrinks for lack of energy and expands for expansion and flow of energy. So energy flow, body flows. Energy blockade, the body is blocked. And it's really simple. And at the same time, when the body tightens and shrinks, it constrains circulation. That's only logical. Mm-hmm. But the Chinese actually say that the flow of energy is inducing blood flow. It induces it. It actually is like a magnet, a magnetic induction of the flow of fluids. And so when there's stasis of energy, there's stasis of fluids. When there's stasis of fluids, you have the potential for disease. And so if you could identify the cause of that static quality in the energy, and you could remedy it, well, you would have a very powerful tool for healing. Mm-hmm. And that is in fact true. And on the physical plane, people use tapping on the body with a bonger, or what? Slapping, manipulating, massaging, all these physical things that are done to induce energy to flow or fluid to move. And so the Chinese have another saying, which is the sort of full circle. It says the qi is the commander of the blood, but the blood is the mother of the qi. So if you don't have blood, you don't have energy, but if you don't have energy, you don't have flow. So it's one of those catch-22 type of concepts.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, the whole energy system, as we have come to understand it through clairvoyant interactions with angels, is the human being is in a circuit that is heaven to earth, earth to heaven type of circuit, yang and yin, and that we can be more or less integrated into that circuit. And when we're less integrated, we're less vital. And a lot of the work is actually you could say, configuring, maybe you could say hooking up the energy system in the body to the source of the energy. Because if you disconnect it through different kinds of states of mind that are resistant or negative or otherwise oriented and disposed, if you're disconnected, there's going to be a consequence on the physical plane. We know that. And many times you could think of them as the energy cables that hook the human being to source have been cut. It's like somebody snipped them and they can't flow the energy.
How would that happen? So
Yeah,
on this physical realm, I mean, trauma can certainly cause disease, and I mean, low vibrational thinking.
This is to the conduit that brings the energy to the body. This can be disconnected. And this is, sometimes we see that flow that you could say is the natural source connection, or natural expression of the source connection. The energy comes down the channel in toward the crown and turns around before it gets there. So the body doesn't even get that portion of the energy that is not entering. And the angels say, sorry, but the system is not hooked up properly. It's not
plugged in.
And there's different expressions of source energy. And of course, we know the words yang and yin, the male, the heavenly force, the Chinese call it the heavenly qi, and also the earth qi. Okay, so there's yang and yin. And those are literally two forces. And to fill in this image that the angels have worked with so beautifully in our practice, it's like when I was studying acupuncture in China, they said that the human being is like a tree with roots in heaven and roots in earth, and that the tree is oriented towards both sources of energy. So that was very meaningful. Right. Mm-hmm. It was very meaningful to me to see that. And then there's another image that we've come across that angels work with, and that is that not only do you have yang and yin, but you have the overall phenomena of energy, period. Mm-hmm. And the source, which is really beyond polarization or polarity into the one, non-dual essence. And so, in fact, there are three reflections of our energetic nature. There's yang, there's yin, and there's a non-dual essence, which in some traditions is referred to as our eternal essence. It's the state of our soul, you could say, or our pure beingness might be another way of saying it, or pure. Another word might be that our very essence can't even be defined. It's something so quintessential, but so non-physically referent that it's just pure eternal essence. And maybe that's the divine nature that we are, is we're made of this stuff that you can't define. Mm-hmm. It's not
you can try to understand it.
Right. But anyway, our energy system requires these particular, you could say, we have to be optimized. To be truly healthy, we have to have at least a basic level of connection to source in these different ways to be truly healthy. And so one way you might think of it as grounding into source, grounding into God, grounding into the earth. You could say connecting is the word. Mm-hmm. So a lot of our work is helping people to optimize their connection, because these can be traumatized. And when you said, oh my God, like, what? It's like, yeah, that's the way I think about it. Like, wow, if you don't have that, where are you going to go? When you can literally see the body having a basic requirement for energy that comes from source. And we've seen in working with people who have cancer that when you optimize that source flow into the body, their symptoms will retreat in incredible ways. Like their blood tests change overnight. Their level of pain changes instantly. It's just amazing.
And it's not a temporary fix. It's a stable, secure.
You know, our being is always in change. So to say it's a fix is not the right thing. It's to give a supply of something. The energy flows into the body from source around a state of mind. And the more a person really focuses in such a way to optimize that flow and that connection, that you could say that's the secret. That's the secret, to keep that flow happening. And rather than fixed, here, now you're fixed, now go on with your negative thinking and hold your grudges and turn away from what you know to be the universe calling you or asking of you, you know, basically to reorient to the best you know. Just carry on with what got you in trouble in the first place, and you've been fixed. Well, that's not realistic. It's really asking for a person to refocus and upgrade their awareness and their vibration, because you could say it's vibrational healing. And so the more, that's what we do based on awareness. It's awareness healing, really. That's kind of what it is. It's like turn, you know, through the angel guidance, understand the nature of the impediment in your awareness that's blocking this aspect or that aspect of your physical existence and your physical health. Understand how there are factors that influence you. It'd be fun at some point in this interview actually to consider some of those factors that block the energy, because you'll get a feeling for how much control we have when we have awareness. Like we have tremendous control if we have awareness.
It's the aha moment.
Right.
We can dive into it right now if you'd like. That'd be really interesting.
I don't want to direct the interview, but I'm happy to do it. So we'll just give an example of the day that I became clairvoyant, which was 1994. And I was in Massachusetts. I was invited to talk about energy medicine, because that was my specialty at the time, at MIT, at a college, a school inside the MIT university. Society for Organizational Learning, and I was a speaker there that evening to a number of students and faculty. And after people heard my lecture, some of them signed up for sessions with me. And the next day, I saw a young graduate student. This was my second to last client that day. I had another client who said, there's an amazing story about my engagement with the angels, the first part of that first day of clairvoyance. But by then I was a veteran. I'd had one really amazing encounter with angels relieving a person of a dark force that really changed their lives. And so this other person came to me. She was a young graduate student. Actually, she was post-grad. So she was very academically qualified. I believe she was postdoc. That's what I meant to say. And very intelligent, very lovely person. And her physical body was in a very extreme posture, with her head horizontally oriented, laid on her right shoulder. And she didn't have any control over the fact that her head was just leaning hard to the right and basically resting. As I say, her neck was very crooked in this terrible posture that she'd spontaneously gone into 4.5 years earlier. So she'd been that way for 4.5 years, and she'd seen neurologists and physical therapists and chiropractors and massage therapists, and she'd had a lot of treatment with no relief. And it was spasmodic. So that's just how she was. And she couldn't straighten her head. All she could basically do was that. She couldn't turn to her left at all. So she was in a bad way. And it was a very sort of like compelling deformity. And actually saw somebody while she was traveling who was in the same posture. And then
years later,
yeah,
I didn't know Peter when this occurred in his practice, but years later in Philadelphia, crossing the street with my sister, and we were chatting with each other, and I just looked in front of me, and there was a woman just passing me, and her head was over on her shoulder, as he had often described to me. And I got to the other side, and I thought, oh, I should go find that woman. I should give her a business card. We might could help her. And I couldn't cross the street, and then she was gone. She was lost in the crowd, but I saw what he has been describing for so long.
Anyway, when she walked into the treatment room the next day for her appointment, my first words to her, beyond, hi, how are you doing, come in, but my first significant words to her were, who's that? And she said, who's who? And I said, well, there's this man standing next to you on your left, and his head is laid on his shoulder, and your head is, of course, on your shoulder, and there's a tube coming out of his neck into your neck. He's to your left. Her head was on her right shoulder, and this man was standing directly beside her.
An image.
And she doesn't see what you see, so she has no idea.
But the first thing she said, and immediately, was, she took a big breath in like that and went, it's my father. And I said, why do you say that? Because I had no idea. And she said, because 1 week after my father killed in a fall, whereas he was decapitated on a pipe when he fell off our family home garage roof. When he was doing some work on the roof, he fell and landed on the sharp edge of a pipe and was decapitated. And she said, it never occurred to me that this disability I have been suffering was related to his death. But in fact, my head spontaneously went into this posture 1 week after he died, and I've been this way ever since. And I was like, whoa.
There's some direct connection right there.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And of course, this was day one of clairvoyance, so it wasn't like I was super experienced or something. I was just like, wow. And here's this man, his image is shimmering next to her. And I'm like, well, let's call on Archangel Michael, because of the thing that happened to me earlier in the day where a man was delivered from literally a possession by an entity, a dark entity. And it was an amazing deliverance. And the dark entity was perched on that man's shoulder. That's another story. But the entity was removed after I called on Archangel Michael. And I thought it only fair if this guy's coming to me in a state of psychosis, which was literally how he showed up, with a dark...
Whereas the night before, after the lecture, he was in...
He was a graduate student at MIT, and he approached me the night before, quite normal state, asking for a healing. Little did I know. And I'll tell that story in a minute, but I'll finish this one with the lady and the ghost attached to her. Because when I called on Archangel Michael, and as soon as she finished having some final sort of conversation with her dad, she invited Archangel Michael to remove her father's ghost from her field of consciousness, her aura. Mm-hmm. And I watched this man disappear upwards and out of her aura. And I watched her head go boing, straighten up perfectly.
Wow, as if it never happened before.
Control her neck and look over her left shoulder so exquisitely that her chin was actually behind the seam over in the middle of her shoulder. She could, and we've seen a few clients, Anne has witnessed this as well, where a person can actually turn their head so far that their chin is that way of the central seam. So you can't, and most people can't. And this is measured passively. So it's like,
it's almost like an owl that turns their head and it just goes way far.
And imagine that for 4.5 years, you haven't turned to the left at all.
Wow.
And suddenly you're putting it behind the middle seam of your shirt over your shoulder. And that's what puzzled me the most, which was, wait a minute, if you haven't been able to do that for 4.5 years, and suddenly something changes in your aura and a ghost leaves you, and suddenly you can look that far to your left. Like, what about stiffness? I mean, if you don't move your head in a certain way for that long, it shouldn't move, right? Everything should be.
What about atrophy?
Right. All, like just everything should be different, right? And you just don't wave a magic wand and all of a sudden all those functions are restored to you. But in this case, and I observed it and she experienced it, and I contacted her a month later and she was fine.
Wow. Did she feel a difference energetically?
Oh my God.
Oh, yeah.
Like she was perceptive to it. She'd be like, wow, this is just.
Oh. And you should have heard the conversation she had with her dad. Because he had molested her as a child and she was pissed. And she told her dad in no uncertain terms and just with contempt just said, I'm ready to let him go. It wasn't a super friendly conversation. It was just basically, I'm mad at you. And I'm having, I can't quote it, but it was in the spirit of, I'm really bothered by what happened. I never got to talk to you about it. And you can go now, basically.
And release it.
So when she said, I'm done, I said, well, let's call on Archangel Michael and ask Archangel Michael to take your father into the light and release him from attachment to you. Which she said, fine. So we declared it, and that's when he left. And it was not ceremonial. It was unceremonious. It was rather abrupt. It was, get the heck out of here. Go away. Get him. Go. And so he did. And her head snapped into proper function instantly. And she was healed. And I was literally, I will be working with angels for the rest of my life. That's how I got to it.
Wow.
I had no idea before that. Like I was beginning in my journey, you could say, working with energy. I was having voices that were suggesting to me certain new ways of understanding the energy. And I was following those, and I'd already figured out there was distance healing and was practicing that. And was demonstrating that. And clearly it was an energetic universe, and the mind was very present in the universe as an influence of energy. I'd figured all that out. And I'd already studied acupuncture and was practicing that. And I had a pretty fair idea of this thing called energy, but little did I know the mind was what was directing, or at least interacting with the energy. And so to figure out some of those influences and to be able to interact with influences that really, let's think about it. So I see somebody who has a ghost attached to them and it's causing a physical problem or disease or deformity. And we've seen thousands of people who fit that category, by the way. And then I, as a human being, am supposed to have authority over somebody who's attached to another human being as though I had any power over that. Like, what would be my right to address that? I would have no right. I mean, logically, I just go down the street and I see somebody with a ghost and I go, be gone, be gone. Hallelujah, brother, you've been saved. No.
You could save everyone. Just
I'd save you. Oh, entity, alert. Okay, just say, be gone. These kind of things are not realistic. I mean, it's comedic. And so I had to learn, how these matters could be resolved by a higher power. And that's my point. And day one, through 2 seminal experiences, I figured out that angels can, on request, interact, and in some cases, in an emergent situation, which the first one really was, the man was not in any condition to ask for anything. This first guy with the demon on his shoulder was in a psychotic break was frothing at the mouth. He was cursing and sputtering, making no sense whatever. And I'm like, what are you doing in my clinic? Like, that's not what I do.
And this
okay?
is the man that you'd seen the night before, right?
Yes.
He was completely.
This was the man who I met the night before. He was a new patient to me, but he booked the appointment in his own person. And then he showed up in this psychotic state. And when the demon was dispatched by the angel, it's quite an interesting story to tell.
So that was the first connection.
That was the day that I went, okay, angels, wow. Because I called on Archangel Michael silently when I saw this hyena-jawed gargoyle on this man's right shoulder with a tube into the side of his head, like this lady had a tube into her neck, and this man had a tube into his temple from this gargoyle. It was very strange, and he was very deranged. He was in a psychotic state. And so I just said an absolutely silent prayer. Help me, Archangel Michael, is what I said. And all of a sudden, the man changed his focus from me to looking over my left shoulder and started through his own mouth, like not me talking to him. I never said a word to him about an angel or anything.
But you called on an angel because you did have the connection of Archangel Michael dispatching demons.
No, this was number one experience of Archangel Michael dispatching demons. I just knew philosophically
that's what I'm talking about.
In my life experience, you see that symbol of Archangel Michael with the spear and the dragon gargoyle-like thing under his feet with a spear in his side. I knew that. Right. I mean, that was just generic information.
So that's why it flew into his mind. If I'm seeing a demon, Archangel Michael, help me.
I mean, it took me a long time to really start to connect some of these dark, you could say, in these dark phenomena to reality. I had no idea. It took me a long time to start to properly estimate the nature of the dark force in human affairs. But that was a good introduction to it. And the idea that an angel could dispatch what was a dark force, dark entity attachment, that was new to me. I mean,
so you left the story with, he started talking.
Right.
Over your
well, this man, when I said a silent prayer, help me, Archangel Michael, and then this man is looking over my left shoulder and saying, oh, these were the first words. I remember this clearly. Oh, like I'm scared. Out of this man's mouth, looking over my left shoulder. And I'm like, really? Is this happening to me? Like, what's going on here? And literally, then he went on to basically from the client's mouth, the words, he's mine, he's dead meat. And all these
he was totally possessed.
He was possessed, absolutely. And I could see it. I could see it. And that was strange to me. I had no previous experience with demons or with exorcism or anything like that. Just the culture, the movies, the this and that, that I maybe would have seen as a child, where people were possessed or something, but no experience like this. And then all of a sudden, as though the angel over my left shoulder unveiled itself to this man's demon, the man's voice, or the demon speaking through him, said, hey, that's no fair. I'm out of here. Now that is the strangest little narration you can imagine, right? Hey, that's no fair. I'm out of here. Well, what wasn't so fair, I don't know, but I presume it was like all of a sudden, you're an angel, I'm a demon, and I have no defense against you, I'm out of here. It's kind of what I took it to mean.
Like a little battle.
And it disappeared. And the man shapeshifted into a normal human being, graduate student at MIT, and started telling me about a 7-year obsession with suicide. And that his 7-year clock related, like in 7 years, you will be dead. And he let it be known to me that he was in his end of the 7 years. I'm getting ready to die. And I was like, holy God. Like, I was incredulous. this was not in any way related to my prior experience in life. And so that an angel should show up and actually remove a demon
When called upon.
Was a pretty good introduction to what we do today. Although we don't do deliverances per se, like exorcisms, and people are not, calling on the priest or on us as an alternate to the priest to do exorcism. That's not our exact practice, but we see plenty of demons in our practice, literally.
So your experience, what allows a person to have a demon around them energetically? What is there something they have to specifically do to open their field up in that way?
Tricia, that's a great question. And any one of us, I have had many, many demons, and I've been in the grip of demons, and I have behaved according to demon influences at certain points in my life, no doubt. And I've had demons removed, thank you, God, because a demon is a dark force influence that's below the level, in most cases, of conscious awareness. I think this man probably knew he had a demon attached to him, but most people don't. And since I can say, being human, I've had my share of dark aspects of my being that had to be healed. Thank you, God.
Thank you, God.
And, I just don't think any of us can hold ourselves above that. We don't know until you actually see it. And I think Ann and I, we've seen countless examples of normal, everyday, nice people who actually are shown by the angels to have demon attachments, creating certain dark, negative thoughts, hatreds, unforgiveness, self-hatreds,
gossip, criticism.
Yeah.
But the beauty,
bad habits.
And there really is a beauty in seeing a demon in someone's field.
Yeah, we rejoice when we see them.
We rejoice when we are shown a demon, because that means that some of their, if you can call it this, their soul light, somewhere in their soul's journey, got dissociated. And somewhere.
In a state of mind, in an astral.
And wants to come back. So when the angels show a demon, they always show a soul fragment. And when you call that soul fragment back, having released the demon, that soul light shines brightly again in your field.
And you could say it's the remedy of a dark mind state.
So we've seen all manner of things. We've been taught to see all manner of things. Never, ever once is it despairing to see something. It's always, if they're showing it, this is what is ready to heal.
Mm. Right at
the thing I love most about, say it again, I'm sorry.
I just said that it's right at the opportune moment that it shows up, and it's a sign that it has to go.
That's a perfect point, Tricia. The thing we say is, what we see is what is ready to heal. Like the angels will show things that are ready to heal. If you have more lessons before you get to something, and you could say your soul nature or something that would be an upgrade or a healing to you, but you're not ready to receive, like kindergarten before first, etc., and finally college and whatever, if that's the trajectory. It's the same spiritually, if you're just learning. And we always say, although demon is a very dramatic word, and we are very suspect of terminologies as putting people off. Like if somebody could already have sort of been looking at this interview and going, oh, what a bunch of BS. Come on. I mean, seriously. Well,
some
maybe
people
demon
won't resonate, but that's okay.
Right. And maybe demon is for them like a complete impossibility. You could say, but if you ask that person, is it possible that a person could live in a chronic state of negative mind? Like, I hate that person. I just want to kill that
vibrational.
person. And could you call that a demon? The person would go, yeah, I guess that's kind of like a demon. Yeah, they chronically focusing negatively towards something or somebody.
Quit screwing your face up like that.
Well, what I'm saying is, the person could be like really like put off by the word demon, but they could be very understanding that people can fall into dark mind states that are like demon-induced states of mind. To tell you the truth about this whole matter of the objective existence of dark entities, it's at the very least a chronic, or might even be temporary, but it's a negative state of mind. And I believe the entity image, whether you call it a demon, which I personally am very comfortable with the word demon, as an actual spiritual entity of darkness, because I've had so much experience with people who have been living in the grip of such and seeing their lives change when such are released, including my own dark, shadowy parts upgrading when I found the dark part of my mind that was needing an upgrade. And it came to me looking at my own self as that's a demon. That's, you could say, feeding on my negativity. And I have to change my mind to not feed that entity. Well, what an entity is, I think we're agreed that we can't go further than to say it's something that is essentially a parasitic aggregation of negativity that sucks into itself like darkness sucks in the light, or something like that. Or it's sucking. It's like
like a leech.
And whatever a demon is or a dark entity is, I would just literally, the way I think of it is, it's a mirror to some dark state of mind. And the key to the whole thing is the state of mind. And excuse me, if you can get to the source of your own negativity, you can, I think you can truly, and you make a choice against that kind of persistent negativity, especially when it's a spiritual dark force. If you call out to the source of light and goodness, terminology aside, however you think of it, you could say to the universe, once you became aware of the source of darkness or negativity and your own involvement with it, you're 9/10 of the way to deliverance from that.
So it truly is a mixture of mind, body, spirit.
So like Ann said, we see a demon, we don't. Say that again?
I apologize. I think the connection was a little off.
The connection stuff.
I just want to say that it's truly like a trifecta of the mind, body, spirit working coherently together in order to either change mindset and your field and the energy that you emit, so that the parasitic entities can't even come towards you.
Yes,
If
exactly.
we're not leaking, there's nobody to sup on that light.
If we're not blood in the water, the sharks won't really key on us. But if we're leaking blood into the water, probably we might attract a shark. And if we're leaking negative mind into the environment, there are, you could say, astral forces, because I don't need to use religious terminology at all. I am not religious. But I can just say whatever the entities are that feed on such, it's analogous to parasites feeding on the life force of the living, and they detract from the life and influence the life. And so who better to release a dark force than a force of light that is divinely empowered and inspired. And again, all terminologies aside, terminology is not the criteria, but the intent. I like that word, intent. The intent is. And when people have the intent to be delivered from anything dragging them down, that terminology would work. Anything reflecting or fomenting negative mind, that would work. And call it what you will. And there are many different kinds of entities. That's another good topic for discussion. Many different kinds of entities, but the bottom line is the degree to the orientation, you could say, to light or dark is the orientation, as I understand it in the universe, is that there is source, there's a light source. There's a source of light that gives us our life. And there are many false, you could say, there are those forces that would feed on that rather than support and enhance the life force. And so it's just to figure out what is what. And usually it's fairly simple to look at. I would say it is simple because the one is destructive, negative feeling, captivating, kind of negative loop type mindset. And the other is generous and, it's just naturally feels better. So it's not rocket science. None of this is rocket science. That's what I love. I didn't really learn how to do this from any kind of religious background or training. It's really more just the things we just know work or don't work in life, basically. It's pretty straightforward. No big.
I totally agree with you there. I think also a part of intuition has a lot to do with it too, to just follow your heart. And if you're centered in it, you'll know which way is one path, maybe lighter versus the darker side. And it's just about listening to that internal guidance.
Our guidance system is our body.
Mm-hmm.
If something doesn't feel good, we can steer away from it. If something feels really, really good, but we know it's wrong, we need to analyze that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The guidance system will always tell us, and where there is pain, I say it's like a child pulling on the coattails of its parents saying, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy, Mommy, 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 look, look, look." And we say, yeah, I'll get to you in a minute, I'm talking here. And the child keeps on calling, and we keep ignoring it, or we put it to bed, or we give it a bath, we try to make it be quiet. But the body will always let us know when there's something that needs our attention. And when we go toward it rather than away from it, we can find some answers.
Right.
Oh, go ahead.
The body intelligence is extreme. I was just going to say, the body is the declaration of truth when it comes to the flow of energy and light. The dark mind won't flow the energy, and the body will show that. The body is very intelligent. And the minute the light force returns in the ascendancy, the body will start flowing the energy better, which means it's immediately looser, brighter, less pain usually. Though in the process of healing, sometimes just the difference of the light or the energy will temporarily provoke more pain before the barrier to the flow collapses suddenly and the pain with it. And then the flow is reestablished. But in general, the more truth, the more the bright light flows through the body, literally a stream of photons, I believe. I truly believe that. It's a stream of photons. And it changes the connective tissue, and the body instantly, measurably opens. And I have a little theory about that, actually, how that works. That is sort of like a kind of basic insight into how we have our life. And I say the body is pulsing with light, and the light is rising and falling like that. And when the light is high, the body is loose, and when the light is less, the body is tighter, and so it goes. And if that's a sine wave, the body's opening, closing, maybe over the opening, closing, opening, and the body is expanding and shrinking and expanding. And so it goes, and that's a pump. And the fluid is flowing out, and the fluid is compressed back in, and the fluid is flowing out, and it's compressed back in. And that is not a quagmire. It's not static. It's not a swamp. It's a living system with movement, and fluids are moving, and that brings life. And where there's trauma and negative mind and dissociation and all these different factors, which are really the very essence of our work, is to identify what stops this flow of life.
Fluidity of it. Mm-hmm.
The angels are so good at just showing that. And when you resolve whatever piece of that puzzle is being shown and healed, the one measurable consequence of that act is looser and change of color towards nice, healthy, flush, something that looks alive. Mm-hmm. And it's so wonderful to work with that, both locally in the tissue through these things that can sense very deeply. And that's the great act of healing that has been from forever, just the act of love. And we say the best touch is the listener's touch. And the body loves the energy that is just pure awareness without direction. And that's a magic all of its own. And I think there are millions of brilliant practitioners who've figured out how to listen. And in the process, given an open door for the body to express its intelligence, because that extra little bit of energy can tip awareness in the direction of restoring flow. And the body is genius at trying to express all the impediments as vectors of impediment. And this vector and that vector, and it moves this way and that way as the body tissues actually release vector by vector until finally the barrier collapses and the energy flows again. And I believe that's physical healing facilitated by a really adept listener whose energy lets the body express its own awareness of the various directions of blockade and release them one by one until the energy flows again. And that is a real time. I've seen it in thousands and thousands of people. And I know that that is the brilliance of a loving, listening touch that is listening to the tissue and giving it an opportunity to say where the blockades, vector aspects are and resolve them itself just through the additional energy, non-directed energy of the listener being present in the middle of the lesion. It's brilliant.
I mean, it sounds like you could never go back to just being like a physical therapist, a regular. Once you know these other tiers and levels of and modalities of healing and understanding energy, it seems almost impossible to go back to a regular.
Right.
Well, it would be, having learned enough. We've treated physical therapists and doctors and various and sundry people, and they've just said, how can I go back doing what I'm doing, knowing that there's so much more that I could know and could help with.
And we hardly we are not the end all and be all of any of this. It's a mystery beyond imagining, because
we just do what we can.
Yeah, we just do what we're shown. And we just know that you can invoke the holy angels and the divine wisdom, and that it can engage through actual subtle energetic connection. It's like docking a space station and a capsule, and they just go chunk, and they're docked. And I feel the angelic engagement, something like that, when I make an invocation and I open my third eye, and I'm suddenly like, I have docked to the angel. The angel now is expressing through me, and I feel it in my body through the subtle induction of my own energy and my attention and my mind. And so Anne is very good at this as well. And it's a very marvelous thing.
It's a very subtle experience to be directed by an angel or angels, to see something in someone else's field or in their body. They can show amazing things. In order to learn to do that is one thing. The other thing is that the angels, through Peter, through all these years, have given us a language that we speak quite well. And so when they are pointing to something in the field, they're pointing to something that they've trained us to understand.
Like maybe there's 5 billion different kinds of entities, and maybe we only know 50. But if we know the basic things that those 50 or even 5 entities do that are common, even if we don't know exhaustively all the negative parasitic influences in the universe, but whatever we do know, if they're common, then to understand and be able to help somebody to understand through what the angels are showing, the nature of that parasitic mind influence. And people will see themselves immediately. Like there's certain kinds of entities that promote depression. Click, boom. oh, you've got that kind of entity. Well, people who have that kind of entity usually are depressed. And so probably this relates to depression. And then the person says, yeah.
Well, I'm not that depressed, but I'm depressed from time to time. Yeah, or yes, I'm really depressed a lot of the time. They're varying degrees, but the angels show it. When they show it, they're ready to heal it. And that's the wonder of it all.
Right. And then, you know, there are all sorts of different kinds of entities, but I have to say the most common of them all, we call the God of this world. And I know, Tricia, that you'll be familiar with this, just from having a very broad knowledge, as you do, esoterically, the word reptilian. And so you can go on the internet and you can see these are almost cartoonish, something that might look like a cross between an alligator and Spider-Man. But reptilian consciousness, as in reptilian brain, is on the very understandable side of reptilian entity. And the basic consciousness is fear-based and survival-oriented and ready to make a move to, in the direction of survival, fight, or flight. Even if fighting is like the last thing that's needed, when the reptilian consciousness is aroused, I'm out of there, or I'll just fight to the death, or whatever it is. But that kind of consciousness is not very evolved, and it can be very radical in its effect on the energy system. And I would say almost everybody has some kind of reptilian dynamic or reptilian
influence. Some sort.
Yeah, influence and pattern, reptilian-based pattern, like certain areas where, you know, people are pretty, you could say, thrown into their fear, they're antagonized, they're no longer in their heart, they're more based on, they're relating around something that's aroused fear. And I believe is the basis of war, greed, lust, so many different things. It's just basic. It's built into the nervous system as a kind of like, you would say, emergency survival mechanism. Like we need it when we need it. But some people live there all the time. And really life is inviting us to go up into higher places in our nervous system, like the frontal, prefrontal areas, and our hearts, and relate from positive rather than from fear, from love, from inspiration, from what is noble and awesome, and what is very expanded awareness that sees the nuts and bolts and just fundamental aspects of reality, might have some other dimensions to it where there's wonder and awe and mystery and possibilities unimaginable. And those things are in the higher part of the nervous system. They don't come out of the reptilian brain, which is all about contracture and getting in there.
And we get so caught up with it. And we oftentimes are justified by our reactivity to people and to things and circumstances in our life.
And our loved ones even. Anne and I'm fully versed in the blessing of angels removing reptilians, because I can say I don't think we'd be married today if we hadn't had a lot of reptilian habits,
ways of being,
ways of thinking, ways of relating, ways of reacting, with entities attached to our own reptilian sort of dispositions. If we hadn't had that addressed and healed, and we have, by the grace of God, healed so much of that, that we live, pretty much our life is in wonder. And our life is, we connect positively, and we have reactions to each other, which we get to speak to each other and say, hey, this is what's going on for me, and this is how I'm experiencing my mind working. And we can just by naming that we're in the middle of a reaction, we usually can diffuse the reaction.
Rather than making it about, well, you did this to me.
Right. Well, I'm having a reaction that would say, you did this to me, but I'm taking ownership of it. Right away, as soon as I use that language, I'm like stepping above the reaction, because I can see myself in a reaction and I can see that it looks like the other person, in this case, my beloved. And I can say, in this reaction, this is how it is working inside my mind, and this is how you look to me in this moment. And I'm reacting to that, but I know it's mine, and it's mine to heal too. And the other person may say, no, I get why you might be doing that, feeling that, thinking that, reacting that way. And thank you for taking ownership of your part of that. But I'm in there too. I can see that. And we can work it from that point of view rather than laying it on the other person as a big projection or a big reaction.
And I'll give you an example of reptilians with a client that we worked with some years ago. And the woman came, and one of her complaints in her life was that her husband was not treating her very well. And she said, I'm really disheartened by this. He was not being abusive. He was not being physically abusive or so much verbally abusive, but just not treating her very well. And we said, well, in our understanding, it's not really about the other person. It looks like he's the one not treating you well, and that's your reality, but you can't change him. What is it in you that is calling that to you? Mm-hmm. And as we worked with her, the angels represented that there were reptilians in her field. They were released. She called us the very next day, because this was an evening appointment, and she said, it's changed. It's like magic. He's been so nice to me. He came home tonight and he was just so nice, just like daylight and dark. And I bet he has reptilians too. Can we fix him? And we said, well, we're not about fixing, but it is true that oftentimes if you find yourself in that sort of reactivity pattern with someone, that it's the reptilians that are duking it out with each other. And we, as the humans, are just sort of carried into the fray.
On for the ride.
And we don't think that we have, what's the word I'm looking for? We don't think that we have any power for that. But we always have power within to change ourselves. And as much as I, in the past, wish that I could help Peter to change something in some way, if I just explained to him over and over again what was going on, why I was so upset, why I was in a mood, could you just listen to me? And Peter's like, please. And we started realizing that there was something more going on. And we started going to the angels and asking. They started revealing the reptilians. And when those patterns started to change and the entities were removed, we found the way that we use now and that we train other people to use, how to interact with another person in a relationship so that you're not pinning them against the wall saying, you need to change, or you're doing this and that needs to stop, but interacting in a way that is more loving, more revealing of self, and more connecting as the outcome.
That's beautiful. It sounds
it is beautiful, and I have to say,
consciousness in their own interactions, which is fundamental to quality relationships of any kind.
Mm-hmm.
The angel, I think, interaction, the angelic help that comes is a very important part of what we describe as, to a certain extent, a good way of communicating, but also to go to the angels and say, I'm experiencing this, what's up? Mm-hmm. Because we don't know why we're having such a reaction. And what they often show us, well, when you were like at such and such an age, such and such a thing happened to you, you dissociated around that. That's your button. And you need to integrate that self. Because
that proverbial button, the button that we all have. That
little button has a traumatic history and a traumatic basis. And the entity will plug in where you're not. So there's a wonderful parable that I know in the New Testament. Again, not being a religious person, but this makes total sense. And that is that a house was inhabited by a bunch of vagrants. And the story that Jesus told in this parable, and I think it's in Luke 17 as one, it's in many different, it's in several gospels, but this one version, Luke 17, I think, the vagrants are thrown out. Jesus says, unless you occupy that house, expect worse back. The idea, if you're not going to live in that, somebody will, and probably even worse. You should be lucky that only such vagrants moved in, because you could have even worse vagrants. So the trick is remove the vagrants, yes, but occupy the house.
And that's what angels do.
I really think that is a beautiful parable of what angels do for a person. They remove the negative forces that live in the vacancy that is built on negativity. I don't want to be in that body, so I dissociate with all my hurt feelings and everything. And I put myself to the side, and that's where I keep my hurt feelings, so I don't have to experience them in my body.
But occasionally somebody will push into those hurt feelings and it'll be alive again.
Right, so they push my button and I'm in that dissociated part of myself reacting with all the feelings that are over there, including my ability, just being a generic human nature, human tendency to project our own negativity outward. And from the dissociation, when we're triggered into that state of mind by a similar, and suddenly we are living in that state of mind and reacting from that old wound. And we're basically trying to live out old woundology. And angels can say, well, the way that you're reacting is amplifying all those feelings, and the entities that are reflecting that negative state of mind that you put to the side, those entities are channeling that for you. And so first things first, understand the negative state of mind, the fears, the whatever, the negativity, the hurt, the trauma, all of that. And then remove the entities that are milking it for all it's worth, if you want to say that, parasitic entities, fomenting negative mind states and living on the energy that just is free lunch to the universe. And you remove the entity, you heal the negative state of mind, you reintegrate the part of you that went to the side with all the trauma, and you heal it. That's what angels are really masters of, is integrating dissociated parts, removing negative energies in the form of attachments and in the form of your own, core negative beliefs in that regard, things that came to for you. Like, I can say that when I was entering into our marital bliss with the exceptional states of that I was living out old fears, that you were such and such and such. It was pure projection.
Or I would turn into something.
Yeah, you would appear to me like I had goggles on, because I was reacting to some other experience, which I had my own take on. And the angels would say, hey, you're reacting from past hurts, trauma, dissociation, entities attaching to all of that, blurring the vision of what's out there in the form of your beloved. And you're having a reaction that's completely non-productive to the relationship itself. Let's get this straightened up. Remove the entities, remove the trauma, name a spade, see to a deeper truth, hold that in the place of a negative story, understand why this is in your life, take full ownership, express love towards yourself and your beloved, and reconnect and heal the pattern that motivated that reactivity and that old, you could say, breakage in your relationship. And it worked. And honestly, that's the wonderful thing I can report. Not that we're the most marvelous couple on the planet. I'm not saying that, but we healed a lot of
Pretty
stuff.
darn good.
We healed stuff.
That's
all I'd like to say.
it. Angels are consistently and compassionately helping us to empower ourselves to be the best person that we can be. Centered, grounded, connected to source. They're showing us where we're not and helping us to be in that way again, session after session, however long it takes. We've been doing this together for 18 years now. We generally work with people 3 times as an initial, because what the angels bring through in the first session is whole and complete and a healing. But when we see 3 different ways of viewing it through the angel's eyes, oftentimes much deeper healing can take place. And we had a gentleman in Vancouver who had a debilitating sciatica. We saw him 3 times, and he reported back, you know, it has gotten better, but I'd like to keep working because everything that they're bringing through is very real, but I'm still in pain. And we did 1 more session with him, and it was completely gone. So we never know when the ultimate healing that someone might be looking for will actually take place. Sometimes, as some of these stories we've been telling, quite miraculously in 1 session. But more and more,
naturally,
it's unveiling a whole story, not just a chapter or 2, but letting the angels tell a complete story about what is the influences, what are the influences behind whatever somebody is experiencing.
It's amazing. So I know we are short on time, but I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about the planetary archetypes that you guys use to identify different characteristics and what someone is going through. We could just do like maybe a brief summary to just give our audience an idea, because we did mention it earlier in the session.
It was such a brilliant experience for Peter to be given this vision years ago. And this was the vision that he was given that we put into brochure form, where the angels actually showed all of the planetary archetypes in a person's field. And so when we made the graphic of it and started using it, we started understanding more and more, what does it mean, Venus? What does it mean, Sun, Moon? What do all of these archetypes actually stand for? And how do the archetypes or the planets actually impact the body physiologically?
So I have a fun story, and I'll just say, for where there's a child present listening to this, this may be more of an adult content. Okay, so just giving the parents an advance notice. But we had a couple where there was impotence, and the lady actually, this was early in my relationship. We went to
very shortly after having received this vision.
Right, very shortly after having been given this vision. And I should say, this vision of the planetary archetypes happened spontaneously in the middle of a healing session with someone we didn't know was an astrologer. And I just announced, hey, I'm seeing all the planets.
And I said, what do you mean you're seeing the planets?
And I said, I'm seeing a solar system. I'm seeing all the planets in this person's aura. And she said, excuse me, but did you know I'm an astrologer? And we said, no. And she said, did you know that the planets have physiological effects on the body? Like the physiology of these archetypes of consciousness, basically. She didn't use those words, but that's how you could explain it. Archetypes of consciousness that trigger physiological functions in the body. So I went, no, I didn't know anything about that. No, I don't know anything about the planets.
But that's the angels focusing in on, we're going to give you this vision, and oh, by the way, you're going to be in the presence of somebody who can give you your first clue.
Right. So she actually returned. She was a client, and she came back to where we were working, which was in Fort Lauderdale that day. And she slipped the written description of the basic physiological effects of each of these planetary archetypes under our hotel door. And so we picked it up and we went, oh my goodness, look at that. Wow. The solar energy brings energy to the heart, and Jupiter affects the liver, and on and on. And we were like, that's really amazing. Now, this means that healing the body through affecting these archetypes, you can actually trigger different physiological responses.
Which means you've got a map of the aura of consciousness simply with the handle of an archetype. And once you take that handle and you understand it, they can say Mars, which they show is right here over the right shoulder, and Venus, which is over the left shoulder. That's their ideal location. But if they're not there, if maybe they flipped, then the angels are telling us something.
So to go, you can see in this map, the red circle is Mars, and this pink circle is Venus. And the one is on the right shoulder, the other is over the left shoulder. And so this lady asked us, excuse me, this was at the end of the day on Sunday, at the end of this Galen Hendricks course on Gay, I think is, yeah, Gay Hendricks is his just everyday name. But anyway, so we took this course, we met this couple, the lady asked, do you treat impotence? We said, well, not exactly, we don't have any history of doing that, but we do know about the planetary archetypes and the fact that these things trigger the physiology of, you could say, sexual functions. And so we'd be happy to look. And so when the course was over and people were just gathering their belongings, we went over into a side area of the conference room, and we took a look at her husband, who's, you know, very interested in healing.
Such a sweet man, just a teddy bear kind of guy, very soft, easy to approach, very nice. Yes,
and when we looked at his aura, the angels immediately showed that Mars and Venus were switched. So Mars is a male archetype of action and directness and intentionality and energy. And Venus is a archetype of relationship and attraction and magnetism, and it's more of a passive attractor, you could say. But they were flipped. So his Venus was in an active mode and his Mars was in a passive mode. And if you look at the astrological symbol for Mars, it's actually the male arousal symbol. So that kind of gives you a clue what that Mars energy is all about, right? Because that's actually its designation symbolically. Anyway, we said we've not seen that before, but who knows? But this looks like it's needing to be treated. And so anyway, the angels flipped his Mars and Venus consciousness. You could say they changed the switch settings, so Mars went active and Venus went passive. And his wife calls us up on Wednesday, that was Sunday afternoon, and she says, can you treat me? And we said, well, why are you asking that? And she said, well, we've been, let's say, very active, and I'm kind of getting worn out, and just wondering if you have a remedy like that for the woman. And we were like, well, tell us some more. And she said, well, my husband has become sort of a lion. And at work, they're wondering what happened to his personality, because he's like very directive and taking control. And people are like, hey, what's going on there?
He's no longer passive. He's in his true male force.
Right.
It's quite the transformation.
So anyway, the point of it, this was one of our early sources of insight into how powerful these archetypes are for triggering the physiological side of the body. And I think it's a great example because we can all smile and laugh and say, wow, that's pretty cool. That's kind of like the energy Viagra in the universe, you know. And of course, there's a whole personality, that aspect of personality that has everything to do with Mars. And we say, you know, there are many things like in the Tarot, Mars is associated with the Emperor. And there are many ways of understanding what is Mars energy and what is Venus energy, and that's not a mystery. So the more you know about those archetypes, as soon as the angels start playing, like what if they showed an entity in Mars? So they literally pointed to Mars. There's Saturn and Mars that are overlapped like a Venn diagram overlap. But anyway, what if they said there's an entity in Mars? And you go, entity in Mars. Well, what kind of? Well, a negative reptilian entity in Mars. Well, Mars can be, if you look at the consciousness, let's see, I'll just read about Mars. Raw life force, action, courage, strength, independence, passion, desire, self-assertion, anger, aggression, frustration, competition, conflict, resistance, and you could go on, war, etc., warrior energy, blah, blah, blah. So you put a reptilian energy in Mars, you might get the warrior going on the berserk. You become a berserker, you know, and so you can do the math, like, oh, entity activating negative Mars states of consciousness. Wow. Okay. So what if you identified the tendency, the issue that you're trying to survive? You know, what are you surviving around? What's your biggest fear? And blah, blah, blah. Remove the entity, restore Mars, which might be somewhere else. The entity could be a stand-in for Mars and look ferocious and strong, but not really. And anyway, when you bring Mars back and you remove the negative influence, and the person is noble and strong and reliable and all those things I just read, you know, that's quite a transformation. And who can do that? I couldn't do that for somebody.
We might understand it, but we couldn't do it.
Right, and this would be full circle to why do we work with angels, and why are angels the basis of healing? Because they're in a realm, we could say, a reference to consciousness on this plane, where they're not absorbed in the problem. They're above the problem, and Einstein said you can't solve a problem from the paradigm that created it, and maybe angels are outside of that paradigm. And so I just love that angels are intelligent, benevolent, they are divinely inspired, and they have a divine mandate, and they're stay
ready
within
to
it.
inform and to heal.
And when you invoke the angels of God, of the light, of whatever you want to call the holy angels, however you try and put a name to this, and you invoke it, you call on it, and it shows up as sort of like you rang. That's how it is for me. The angel always shows up when the person asks to be connected. And so then the angels have these powers to heal people of their dissociations, their traumas, their dark histories, their dark habits.
And we oftentimes don't know anything about why somebody has come or called. We don't know. And
we literally
we'll
read them cold.
Let's ask the angels what it is they want to say to you today, and we invoke the angels. We start bringing the information through, start drawing the pictures, start sharing it with the client, and the client goes, yes,
there's some connection here.
That's
It's amazing when we read people cold and they go, that's exactly why I'm here. That's like, you got it, that's why I'm here, that's my problem.
After, and we always do, if the angels, and if we are not explaining everything that they're bringing through that is meeting what it is that you came for, there will be time for you to share that, and we'll see. And every single time the people say, this is more than I expected, or this is certainly right down the middle of what I'm interested in, or they'll say, you know, it's not really what I expected. It's very real and very true, but I was really coming for this reason. And we'll say, well, if you'll look at these symbols, this reason that you came for actually is being attended to by these, which we can explain to them. So people have to be open to receiving perhaps a different way, because this is very different information.
Certainly.
Most people, they don't know about it. So it takes us from an hour, sometimes 2 hours in a session to bring everything through, get it all understood, and get the person ready to say, yes, if that's true and it can be healed and it's good for me to heal, and healing comes from a higher power, which I have called on, then yes, so be the healing of all of that. Done.
Then we remeasure the body with its previous disabilities or restrictions of motion and whatnot, and there's absolutely change that is visible in most people. Their bodies are changed right here, right now, in such a way that they go, how did that happen? So there's the client, like the man with the failed total shoulder replacement. I got it. I know we're running out of time, but I'll just say, who was basically sent for physical therapy because his shoulder surgery was considered a failure. And so the doctor was just wanting the person to recover so he could go try again when maybe there would be some basic healing.
Said he couldn't get enough tissue to make this prosthesis hold really well.
So we have it on video, and the guy's range of motion, and that is literally, he's been seeing a physical therapist for range of motion, etc., and he can't lift his arm. It's just not there. And
he didn't want to have that surgery.
No.
So he heard about us, and he said, well, I'll go see about this.
Anyway,
And
he had a
next thing
ghost
you know,
attachment.
he's able to move his shoulder.
Yeah, and his mother's ghost had been attached to him. He's retirement age, and his mother's ghost was attached to him since like 21. And when she died from cancer. And anyway, the angels released her.
She was a benevolent ghost. She was there in a caring way, but it still was holding her back from her true procedure or process of her soul development. Part of her remained on this plane.
And when the angels escorted her into the light and she became more complete in her soul, in her realm, his energy could reassemble itself. And on the spot, his arm is right up over his head, and he's like, blah, blah. And he goes back to his surgeon, who goes, that's marvelous. And his therapist, that's wonderful. And they canceled the surgery, and he's out there ever since. He said, we saw him actually, this was about three years ago when that happened. And we've
been here for 2 years. That was
maybe that was 5 years ago or something. I don't know. But anyway, he came back for some other matter, and we saw him recently, and he said, this is my strong arm. This arm is my powerful arm. And he said that he's actually, his testimony is in our brochure. He said that healing restored my shoulder function to me, and I've been kayaking and backpacking and all these strenuous activities, and he said my shoulder has been like gold. I can sleep on my shoulder ever since that healing, and I will
say that was either the third or the fourth healing session that we did with him,
where we saw that.
Yeah.
And so anyway, the idea is the body changes, and that is a very consistent phenomena associated with this approach. When angels change the energy flow, reintegrate the dissociated parts, remove the negative influences, reconnect the source connection, so the energy comes to you from a higher power, from the earth, gets the yin and yang to flow to your essence. And those things, the body changes. It registers it as vitality, and usually the body will quickly turn it into some kind of healing, and immediately express itself as new capacity for movement. It's really fun to see.
Keeps us in the game.
I'll finish this whole discussion by saying, if it was just so simple, and this is simple, but we're dealing with consciousness that isn't analogous to an onion with layers. We have a lot of stuff going on inside our minds. We've been around for this lifetime, and perhaps, as we would see it definitively, many lifetimes. And so we've been, you could say, learning a lot, and also experiencing trauma and various degrees of difficulty in our soul journey. And it's all for a purpose. And when you get reconnected at the soul level and healed at the soul level, which is beyond just the influences of this lifetime, so you heal what is here and now to be healed, and you heal beyond that as the patterns that are still the challenges built into the soul in its journey. And you start to heal into that material, the body, which is the sum of all of that. That's true. The body has relation to this soul. And when the soul is healed and the consciousness of this lifetime gets on down the road of healing, the body heals predictably. And a healing could be, if a person had a terminal disease and they were at the end of their process, the healing could be death. But regardless, the soul becomes more complete as it reconnects to itself. And that's the gift of the angels. It's to reconnect more deeply to source and more deeply to self and soul, and to release those inauthentic states of mind that reflect negative influences coming at us from so many different directions, so we can be more truly who we are. And that is a formula for success in life. Be who you are. And that is a success and happiness, joy, fulfillment. In these archetypes, there is, oh my goodness, so many strengths and virtues and blessings. And just line up the archetypes and they flow their energy into our system more appropriately and more completely. And the body is blessed by it physiologically, and the mind is empowered through it. And this is brilliant. And we won't cover it tonight, but I want to tantalize our listeners. There's another major archetype the universe gave us, and it is complex, and it is a life study, but it's called the Tree of Life. And the Tree of Life, in every book we've ever seen, is always represented as centered on the body. And we won't go into it tonight, but let's say that we have found angels speak through this symbol in very powerful ways, and it correlates to the way energy is flowing from source to the body or not. And it points at the key issues that can be resolved inside that given healing focus.
Always.
That will change our connection to source, so the energy flows from earth to heaven and heaven to earth through us more effectively. And that symbol, and I received that in a vision. I actually didn't know anything about it.
Just
And
like the planetary
I was working
archetypes,
in Germany. Anne was not with me. And when I saw it, I called her in the United States that afternoon when I finished the long list of clients I was seeing there. And I said, oh my God, I just learned.
Symbol too. It's
it's very ancient.
It's ancient.
Like we know it's ancient because it's inscribed on monuments from antiquity. And anyway, I called Anne and I said, I can see the Tree of Life in a person's aura. I'm just learning what it means. But this is going to be a work of our lifetime. We are going to know more and more about this. And we're going to really be working with this symbol to enhance people's healings. And we have ever since, that was like 2003. And ever since, we have been seeing the Tree of Life every session.
Every session.
And it is always correlated to what's happening. It is in reaction to something. And when the angels identify that something, we call it the jewel or the pivotal issue. When we get to the jewel, it off-centers the tree. Because although the books may show the tree is always centered, so. And why it's off-centered? Well, jewel in there.
Something that needs and wants to be healed.
So that's another story for another time, but I just want to say that came as a vision from the angels, and it changed our practice. And
enhanced our practice.
It enhanced our practice big time. And it is an amazing ability. And when people learn how to see that, they have learned very powerful methodology to help people, and also to, because it's so informative, you can check yourself. You have suddenly, where you see the tree, it starts to tell you things about the body, and you can go see if it's true. And you can check it.
I would love to go into more detail another time when we can.
Please, let's do it.
Chat. Could you tell our viewers then how we can connect with you, how we can find you?
On the web, www.youangelYou.com. That's spelled YOUANGELYOU.com. That's the name of our business. We also have a 541-549-1927 telephone number, or 360-837-1592. We welcome calls. We welcome emails at youangelYou@gmail.com. And we're, as you can probably tell, always happy to talk about our work.
Right. And we have one more number for contact. For contact, our cell number receives texts, and that's 916-719-6948. And so you can text us or leave a message on a cell phone. The reception where we live is not great for a cell phone, but as soon as we plug in our Wi-Fi, we turn it off every night. But as soon as our Wi-Fi's on, we can get text messages reliably. And so that's the other number.
Tricia, this has been really fun for us. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Are your ears still attached, or did
They
we
are.
talk
No, they're
them
here. I really appreciate as well that I'm able to go on here and we can chat about all these really topics that I feel like not that many people know about. And I really appreciate that we're able to expand people's minds and awareness that this kind of clairvoyant ability exists and that angels are out there. And I just appreciate the time that we're able to spend together here. And I'm definitely, we will see each other soon, and maybe then we can go into the depths of the tree of life and
Yes.
make perhaps even more detailed about the other entities that you guys know about, see about, because there are a lot of different types.
Well, there are a lot of entities, and they're all exerting different effects.
Yeah,
that's the fun thing.
I believe it.
So when you see a certain kind of entity, it has usually certain kinds of effects, which people can then say, hey, that effect is what I'm experiencing. And you go, we would have actually connected the dots for you if you hadn't said that, because we know the effects, tend to imply that would be your experience. And when the angels release them, people experience, oh, those effects are gone.
Big changes.
Yeah, big changes. So to remove entities is to help you get beyond. And I am virtually, I live in gratitude every day that my mind has been uplifted a notch or two by angels. And I have been, delivered from these negative effects of my own negativity, attracting more negativity to foment what is the inauthentic expression of who I am. So the angels remove that, heal me, reconnect me to me, connect me to source, inspire me, and I'm a better person for it. And I am thankful for the privilege of knowing about angels.
Me too.
Thank you so much again for coming on to the show here. And I'm so grateful for it, and we'll definitely talk soon, all right?
Okay.
Thank you, Tricia.
Awesome.
Thank you, Annie and Peter.